Hi, everyone. I'm Carla Johnson, and some of you may know I'm a small town girl. I grew up in small town America, Laurel, Nebraska, population 1110. That was a number I always remembered as a kid because my mom would talk about it, and it's an easy number to remember. And so even though I started small, I always had ambitions of living in a big world. And I think part of that came because I grew up very close to my grandfather, my mother's father, and he immigrated to America from Denmark when he was 14. And it's all of these stories about the bigger world in which he saw, that he lived, that he would bring to my little hometown family gatherings. Now, it's interesting because I still love to go back and visit my hometown and see my high school friends and see the things that they're doing. Because a lot of understanding about where you're going is understanding where you came from and realizing that it doesn't matter what your path has taken along the way, because I guarantee you mine has taken an incredibly windy path since I went to a one-room country school in my little hometown to where I am today. But it's always possible to reinvent yourself. And that's why I am super excited for our guest today, Dorie Clark. Now, Dorie is someone who has been on the best-selling list. She's done amazing things throughout her career. She's also from a small town in North Carolina, Pinehurst. And she experienced the same kind of urge that I had to explore this bigger world and to experience what's out there. And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of Connect the Dots. Connect the Dots is the show where we dig into the habits, the experiences, the practices of the world's most prolific innovators, where they get inspiration, how they connect the dots into their work, and then how they make all the magic happen in the real world. Now, Dorie is someone who has been named to the top 50 business thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50. She's been recognized as the #1 communication coach in the world by Marshall Goldsmith Leading Global Coaches. She started from very humble beginnings, small town. She's been published and hosted at places like the Harvard Business Review, Stanford University's Graduate School of Business, Georgetown, and many, many, many more. Dorie's going to tell us all about her story and also about a new book that she has coming out shortly, because she is already a best-selling author of books such as Stand Out, Entrepreneurial You, Reinventing You, and they are resources for many marketers, business executives, entrepreneurs, and other people who believe that innovation may not be for them, but it actually is. Welcome to Connect the Dots.
Carla, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks so much.
It's so great to have you here. Now, I was really interested to find out that you are a small town girl yourself. Tell me about that and how you ended up on the world's big stage today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, it's true. I think oftentimes if you grow up in a small town, it does motivate you in a different way, because for some people, it feels very comfortable. That's the place they like. That's the place that they want to stay. But for at least a certain subset, you kind of chafe against it, and you realize, even back in the day, pre-internet, you at least have television. You at least see that other people are doing other things that seem exponentially more exciting, whether it's working in a sexy law firm like LA Law, or you're working in a sexy hospital like ER, or whatever your thing is. But there's a lot of opportunities out there that are not necessarily immediately available in your place, and you want to go and seek them out. And so for me, that was certainly the case. And so I was pretty highly motivated as soon as possible to go out, get, sort of quote unquote, get started with my life. I went to college early, and I wanted to go to the big city eventually so that I could gin up some interesting people and hopefully some interesting opportunities.
That's funny when you talk about the shows that show you what the big, exciting, sexy world is like out there, because when I was growing up, Dallas was the show. And I couldn't wait to leave little town Nebraska and move to Texas and do all of the great big Texas things, which is a big motivator for me. And so I went to the University of Nebraska and I studied electrical engineering for a couple of years, which couldn't be further from what I actually was interested in. But I meandered a lot around in my 20s and tried a lot of things and went, well, that's not it. Well, that's not it. Well, that's not it. And I know you did much of the same. Can you talk about that and And for me, it's had a big impact on where I ended up today. Has that been the same for you?
Yeah, it's true. For me, it was not so much wandering around and deciding that things weren't the right thing for me. It was more just getting rejected again and again. So my first goal, my first gambit was that I would be a university professor, and so I finished my master's degree and I applied to 3 different doctoral programs because I thought that this is the path forward. I'll be an academic, and I ended up getting turned down by all of them. So I had to very, very quickly come up with a plan B, which I had absolutely none in place. I was certain that I would get into at least one, but as it happened, I had to come up with something else. So I very quickly pivoted, and I decided to become a journalist. I managed to get a job as a political reporter at a weekly paper in Boston, and did that for about a year. And unfortunately, this is not a bad choice. It was not a bad pivot, but the newspaper industry was just on the verge of collapse at that time, thanks to the essentially, demonetization of the classified business. And so I got laid off a year into my journalism career, could not find another journalism job. And so I then pivoted into politics, which had been the thing that I was covering. And so I worked on several campaigns. I was the spokesperson on a governor's race and on a presidential race. They both lost. And so was just not having a lot of luck. And eventually I ran a nonprofit for a couple of years. And that is what led me to the realization that I could become an entrepreneur. I could run my own business, very similar to the nonprofit. And so finally, that's really where I have found my niche, you could say. And so since 2006, I've been working for myself, doing consulting and executive coaching and the kind of constellation of writing and speaking and teaching that I do.
Now, and I think in the last year, I mean, always in flux. So I started my business in 2001, and it was really because I saw a need that I couldn't get met as a corporate side person. I worked in marketing, and there was a certain type of storyteller that I needed to support the work that I was doing that I couldn't find anywhere. And I thought, well, there's my opportunity. And so writing that, it was right during the dot-com bomb. It was 20 years ago. Right now, I was starting my company. So, there are these highs and lows, and then going through 2008, 9, 10, and the highs and lows. And then, now it's kind of been really erratic what has happened to companies and especially entrepreneurs this last year. What would you say is the biggest thing that you've learned as an entrepreneur that's probably unexpected, that even when people say, oh, as an entrepreneur, the things you don't expect are, but what's the biggest lesson that you've had?
Well, I think that one element that I think is really important I think most entrepreneurs are well aware of this, but most people who are not entrepreneurs, I think that they're seeing it almost exactly backwards. Many people think that entrepreneurship is risky, and that's the first place they go. Oh, but it's so risky. How will you earn money? How, what will you do without the safety of a day job? And what they don't understand, and I say that very explicitly, what they don't understand is they are at a far greater structural risk than any entrepreneur is. Because when you are working for yourself, you presumably have diversified revenue streams. You have multiple clients. You may be doing multiple things, multiple products or multiple types of services. And that diversification mitigates your risk in the marketplace. And so if one thing changes or if one thing goes away, you are not going to be crippled. I learned very early on when I got laid off from my job as a journalist and they gave me 4 days of severance pay that there is precious little loyalty and that you can just, have the wind taken out of you at almost any point, completely unexpectedly. And so the more safety we can build in, and to be clear, we have to build it in ourselves. We can't rely on a company or a job to do it. The better off we are. So I encourage folks, even if they are working for a company, even if they're happy working for a company, the topic of my most recent past book, I'll just grab it here, Entrepreneurial You, is about how do you create multiple revenue streams in your business. I'm a big believer in people developing side gigs because that is how we protect and insulate ourselves from uncertainty.
I love that. And I want to say hi to our friend, my dear friend, John Burkhart, because he's in London. And one of the things that I love about John as an entrepreneur is that he is like infinitely curious about the things that are going on. And I love that aspect of an entrepreneur. And the number of times I've said to somebody who said to me, "Are you kidding? Like, working for yourself, that is so risky. What if you can't get any work?" All the things that you just went through. And John and I have talked about this quite a bit, is that you really do have this breadth and depth of opportunity that makes everything that you do unlimited. But one of the things that's hard is all of the interests and curiosities and things you want to do versus the amount of time, and working on that burnout. And I know that you have a new book coming out. You said eerily close, scarily close, something like that, on September 21st. And it really is about understanding how to play that long game with whatever it is that you're doing. And I think it's particularly important with people who are entrepreneurs. Tell us about this.
Yeah, certainly. So my new book is called The Long Game: How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. And it very much touches on this theme that, especially coming out of COVID, which is a period when so many of us were forced, not by choice, but by necessity, into or kind of reactive mode, where we just had to upend things, whatever we planned, too bad. We had to really recalibrate rapidly based on forces outside of our control. Now, our ability to adapt, to be agile, is incredibly important. And in moments like that, we see it. But I think it's equally important to realize that we can't live our whole lives like that. We can't be reactive forever. If we actually want to be successful in carving out the life that we want for ourselves, we need at a certain point to pull ourselves back and stop reacting and say, all right, enough. Now it's time to reset the agenda and to be proactive. And I think that's the moment that we're in right now. Now, of course, there's with the pandemic itself, there's lots of things that could change. We're all, watching the Delta variant and things like that. But it's really important, recognizing that the specific path may change. Things, may be rerouted. They may take longer than we want, but we need to create long-term plans for ourselves so that we have a proactive intention that we're moving toward. And so for me, this is really a form of regaining control over our lives and our careers.
And it's I talk about this a lot with innovation, that it's not just about coming up with the next great idea and, for whatever you need it for the next customer experience, the next campaign, the next whatever it is, but to really look at it in terms of the long game for ideas and innovation. And I know you've worked with a lot of companies. How do you, because there's always that struggle between the day-to-day and the long game. So how do you talk to people about, slowly turning the ship so that they can start to at least bring consideration in for that long game in the long term, when they are so focused on, next quarter's returns, next year's results, whatever they have to report or deal with? How do you start to make that shift? Because it doesn't happen all at once.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Carla. And ultimately, in the long game, the very first section of the book that I have is about creating more white space for precisely this reason. Because, we all know, right? You can't pour more water into a glass that is already full. And so if we're going to have the space to be able to do the kind of long-term thinking that we all know is important, want to do, believe is essential, then we actually have to clear out some of the dross first in our schedule. We all have too many meetings. We all have too many emails. And it is incredibly easy to get lulled into a rhythm of just, again, at a micro level, being reactive and doing what's in front of us without actually stopping to pull back and say, wait a minute, am I doing the right things? All the things that I'm executing on so productively and so busily and so flawlessly, are they even the right things to be doing? And it's not that you need huge amounts of time to do it. That's not the point, that you need to have, a month-long retreat, or that you need to have 10 hours a day to do it. But the issue is you do need to have some time. You need to have a break in the action so that you actually can pull back and ask the bigger questions. And a big part of it is understanding that we have to fight back. No one is going to give you that time. You have to take that time.
And that's so important. And I see that a lot with companies that are struggling to show up differently, to behave differently during times of disruption, just like we've had in this last year, and to really understand what to do. I work with a lot of CMOs, and I was talking with somebody a couple of weeks ago, a CMO, and he said, I'm now the crux of everything that happens in our business. Everything lands on my desk. My team is looking to me for what do I need to do for marketing, and the rest of the company is saying, oh, okay, CMO, like everything continues to change. How do we handle that? And I think there's this opportunity that many companies don't realize, and that's teaching internal employees how to be more entrepreneurial, because that really is a huge fuel for the long game and how to think differently. How much do you see this with companies and their willingness to really open the doors and, not necessarily hand over the reins to chaos and just say, go forth and innovate, but, create a culture and frameworks and structure, because I know you have some great frameworks in the long game that helps businesses and people understand how to do that. Can you give us some examples of what you've seen with companies being able to pair this all together?
Yeah, well, you raise a really interesting point, Carla, because being entrepreneurial, thinking entrepreneurially, this is one of the areas in corporate life where it is there's most likely, frankly, to be a disjunct between what people are saying and what they're actually doing and encouraging. Because, it's easy to pay lip service. We think it's a good idea for people to be entrepreneurial. But when push comes to shove, it actually can be kind of scary for companies because they're like, well, what are people going to come up with? Like, what is this actually going to look like? And command and control at the end of the day is actually easier to manage, even if it is not necessarily that effective in terms of tapping the brain power and skills of employees or motivating and engaging employees. So I think that this is a place where action and one's words are a little bit different. Now, one thing that I actually dwell on quite a bit in the long game, I have a whole section about it, is 20% time. Now, this is a concept that people may be familiar with. It was actually created by the company 3M, which is famous for the Post-it notes, but it was popularized by Google. And the point of it is that they encourage employees to take up to 20% of their time, their work time, and devote it to a more speculative activity that is a little bit outside of the bounds of their regular job description. And this is how things like Google News and Gmail were created. So there's been some big home runs as a result of it. But the irony, I thought this was so fascinating to discover, is that even in Google, the company that popularized this, that's famous for 20% time, studies have shown that only 10% of actual Google employees take advantage of 20% time. And I think it's emblematic because the truth is it's hard. People, it's just a lot easier for people to kind of keep doing their job because their job is busy. And so they need to, get that done. And so you really have to be extremely focused and extremely pointed in saying, no, I really am going to carve out this time for learning, for experimentation, for growth. But when you do, you have the ability to actually really have some transformative breakthroughs if you are consistent in applying that time and effort.
You hit on a very, very important keyword there, consistency. And I wanted to say hi real quick to Patrina. She's my friend from Singapore. And I'm curious about the consistency that you see either in different companies within industries or different different parts of the world. Do you see anything like that as far as the consistency and the cultural emphasis on taking this time away to do the work that's most important?
Well, I think this often ties in to another topic that I explore in the long game, which is the topic of failure. And failure is, of course, an interesting and loaded concept. American business life, in some ways, quote unquote, the Silicon Valley ethos encourages failure. You have the mantras like fail fast. And they even have things like FailCon, which is a conference originated in the US, but now, held worldwide, where founders talk about their failures and parse them for people and kind of celebrate them. Now, I think that is good because obviously we don't want to be in a world where failure is so shameful that people don't take any chances at all. But I think it, of course, also covers up the reality that in practical terms, people really don't like to fail. Like, no one's into that. They would prefer not to. And so what I actually really love about the frame of 20% time is that the truth is, even if something doesn't work, it is not going to destroy you, right? If you allocate only 20% of your time or your money or your resources to something, if it doesn't work, like, it's a hassle. It's like, oh, I can't believe I wasted that time. That's annoying. But that's about as far as it gets. You are not going to lose everything because your 20% time project did not work out. But 20% is enough time that, if over a period of months or a period of years, depending on the scope of the project, you are putting in that time, it's actually substantial enough that you really can make some big progress in moving forward. And, who knows, once you start to see that it really is making progress, then it enables you to perhaps reallocate even more time to it and make it part of your official job. So I think that small trials like that are actually enormously valuable as a way of testing things, because the truth is, if you view it up front as an experiment where your goal is to gather data, you're not failing, even if it doesn't work. You are succeeding because you are accomplishing your mission, which is to get the data. So I think that is useful, because outside of the United States, failure, it still does have much more of a stigma. If you're in Asian countries, if you're in a place like, say, Germany, the stigma of having failed can be quite severe. And so finding ways to test things in small ways so that you never actually hit on failure and you don't have to countenance that, I think, can be an important tool in the arsenal.
One of the things that I talk about in my book, Rethink Innovation, is this idea of failure, and a little bit about smart failure versus dumb failure, and unless you're practicing failure in those small increments, the 20%, you end up with horrible big failures. And there's a group, or a guy who has a traveling exhibit called the Museum of Failure. And that's where I found out about things like Colgate's frozen food, Colgate lasagna, which every time I think of it, it makes me think of a minty flavored lasagna, which is horrible. And things like Cheetos flavored
chocolate lasagna, that could actually be
now
delicious.
That might be a thing, right? There's the Cheeto flavored lip balm, which, imagine that was a failure. I mean, I think, why would you go with the lip balm when you could just have the real thing? There's Bix disposable underwear, and I'm shocked that didn't work. And it's this. I think what happens in some environments is that they're so focused on, let's come up with the next huge disruptive idea, innovation, whatever that may be, that there's no reality check about whether or not it is a good idea, or nothing to shore it up against, to do some evaluation before things like that get out the door. And then they end up in places like the Museum of Failure. But I was talking to an agency owner last week at a conference, and he said for about 5 years ago, they instituted this 20% experimentation time in his agency. And I think they're like 25 or 30 people. So it's not a Google or a Netflix or something like that. But he said the consistency of making sure that he and his team actually practice that 20% every single week is what has made phenomenal results for them. Because he said it's like any muscle, and the more consistently you work it and practice it, the better it gets at performing under pressure, just out of habit. It's your default response. So what they're seeing now is that they're getting so many more potential clients coming to them, whether it's for their actual services or to say, can you help us understand how to create the kind of team environment, company environment that you are, because of this 20% time. And it's interesting, this consistent practice of this mindset for the long game of what can really happen. Can you tell us a story, like specifically about a company that you've seen really make a difference because they practice the long game?
Well, I'm gonna go you one better, Carla.
I see you and I raise you.
That's right. Because one of the points that I raise in the long game is that I really try to walk the talk. And so I will tell you, this very morning, what I have been spending my 20% time on over the past 5 years is musical theater. And from zero, literally from zero, I had no idea how to do this. I had never done this before. I decided 5 years ago that I was going to learn how to write musical theater and get a show on Broadway. That was my goal. And so I'm now halfway into my 10-year plan. And so literally this morning, a couple of hours ago, I had a phone call with the leader of a major regional theater. And my collaborator and I were getting advice from him. He agreed to have his new director of new works evaluate our musical that we've written. So, networking, professional development. But that is time. That is my 20% time that I'm putting in, and I'm doing it on a weekly basis. Saturday, I'm having a brunch that I'm hosting for Broadway professionals, producers and kind of a mix of actors and directors and things like that. So creating networking opportunities in that. So I am making sure that in my own life, even on the eve of my book launch, that I am continuing that process. So that's a piece of it. But when it comes to the enterprise level, I will say that really the ultimate example for all of this is Amazon. In the book, I quote what I thought was just a very interesting and revealing insight from Jeff Bezos from a 2011 interview he did with Wired magazine. And he said that he thought that Amazon's secret to its success, and this is of course 10 years ago, before it had even achieved the breakthrough level of success that it had. I mean, it was a big company then. Now it's even bigger thanks to things like Amazon Web Services. But what he said, he thought that the secret of their success was that Amazon was willing to do their strategic thinking and their strategic planning on a 7-year time frame, whereas for most companies, the most they could tolerate was a 3-year planning cycle, because they weren't willing to endure the losses that came with investing in a new business. And he said that if you're able to plan on double that, a 7-year horizon versus a 3-year horizon, you were able to think that much bigger and be able to tackle problems that other companies just wouldn't even touch. And it gives you a lot of uncontested blue ocean space.
And that's an interesting thing, because we hear that all the time. If you're trying to plan 5 years out as a business, you're just crazy, because you can't predict what's going to happen. And I think one of the aspects of really successful companies, particularly when it comes to performance and innovation itself, and making sure that everyone is a part of it and contributes in a productive, organized way, is being able to start with a purpose. And what is the company here for? Because it helps focus so many things that otherwise employees say, okay, we're supposed to have our 20% time, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. And we're supposed to be more innovative, but I don't exactly know what that means. But I think having that focus is so important, whether it is a person as an individual like you and I, or a company. For me, my long game has been learning Spanish. We moved to Spain right before COVID, came back right before COVID, moved for a year. And it is so interesting when you immerse yourself in your long game passion project, it does shift. For me, it shifted how I look at everything else that I do in my day job. And I'm curious, did it do the same for you as you've worked on this play the last 5 years?
Well, I think ultimately, it's not necessarily that it has shifted my thinking about what I'm doing, but it has really forced me to be very intellectually honest, because ultimately the work that I do, in my books, and I run an online course and community called Recognized Expert, which is essentially there's more than 600 people who've gone through the program, but it's about helping smart, talented professionals figure out how to build their platform and how to get their ideas heard in the marketplace. And what I am doing is essentially setting myself that same task in a completely new field where I started with no connections whatsoever. And so it's like me eating my own dog food. Can I actually succeed in doing this? And to me, hopefully, the process is about validating what I am telling other people to do in terms of building their platform in the business space. Now, I did this myself. I worked out the methodology, but there's always, people are skeptical, right? There's always sort of this, yeah, but it's different because blah, 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 because you started X number of years ago, or it's different because blah, 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 because you can do this, or you trained as a journalist, or whatever. There's a million ways that people can perhaps say, oh, well, it wouldn't work for me. And so I am really positing this in many ways as me living out the experiment. And it's a 10-year process. So this is not fast and easy. And like I tell people when in the Recognized Expert program, when it comes to building your platform as a business thought leader, that's not a fast situation either. That's not a fast process. But ultimately, when I look in musical theater, where I've come in 5 years, I went from literally not knowing how to do it to having written a complete musical, to having been accepted into and graduated from one of the most prestigious training programs in the country in musical theater. And I now know and have personal relationships with, I would say, upward of about 40 theater producers. So you can do this. Anyone can do this with the discipline and the work, regardless of the field. And so I view this process for me as a testing and a validation and a keeping myself intellectually honest so I can better help the people in my coaching and in my program.
I love that, because there's nothing like taking your own medicine to make sure that it actually works. So I have one last question for you, because I think for a lot of what people do, there's a tug between one person's outlook and another person's outlook, and which is the right one. And this may be one of the age-old people taking sides on a topic, and how do we handle it? And it is, you are a cat person, I'm a dog person. Like, can't we all just get along? And how do we make that happen?
So right, Carla. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, I have nothing but love and respect for you. All I can say is that no one is making me go outside at 6 a.m. in the cold. So
that right there might convert me. I'm allergic to cats, but that right there might convert me. That's for sure. This morning, my dog came up and was pawing on my leg, like, come on, it's time to get out. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Dorie, this has been fabulous. I am super excited for your new book, The Long Game, which comes out September 21st, right?
That is so true. And I'll just mention, Carla, for anyone who's interested in kind of diving more into the world of strategic thinking, they can learn more. The link is up here, dorieclark.com/longgame. And on that page, you can actually click, there's a link there to download a free strategic thinking self-assessment. And it can just help get you into the long game mindset. So I hope folks will enjoy that.
Excellent. Excellent. I know I'm going to go do that, because I want help with that, with my mindset, as I work on my Spanish game. Now, if other people want to follow the rest of your work, because I know I've looked at your Recognized Expert program, and one of the things I love is that it starts out, you say, if you're looking to make this happen in the next few months, this isn't for you. This is essentially a long game year kind of program. So where can people find you and follow your work?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the best place to go, I put a lot of time and care into curating my email communications with people. That is actually something I feel very proud. Forbes did an article about 18 months ago saying that they had a list of the top 6 newsletters that anyone should subscribe to, and mine made their top list. So if people would like to stay in touch and learn more and kind of get a curated greatest hits of articles that I've written for places like Forbes and the Harvard Business Review and the World Economic Forum, they can go to dorieclark.com/subscribe, and they can subscribe to the newsletter and get regular updates and learn all the things.
That's excellent. And I am a longtime subscriber and also reader. You're one of the few newsletters that I regularly read. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Dorie. I can't wait to see your book come out September 21st. I'm assuming where all great books are sold, Kindle, hard copy, audiobook as well. Is that right?
Indeed. I just recorded it a week or two ago. So
nice.
The audiobook will be available soon.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for joining us here today, Dorie.
Thank you, Carla. So great to be here with you.
For everyone else, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Connect the Dots. Dorie's an excellent expert. And if you're looking to make sure that you play the long game with whatever you're working on, something new you're trying to develop as a skill, your skill as an innovator, because even that doesn't happen overnight, make sure that you check out her new book, The Long Game. Make sure you subscribe to her newsletter. And what we'll continue to do on Connect the Dots is dig into the thought process of the world's most prolific innovators like Dorie Clark. Make sure that you follow me or connect with me directly on LinkedIn. I'd love to know your thoughts about this episode. And you can also subscribe on YouTube and then hit the little bell so that you can see every episode as soon as it goes live. I'm Carla Johnson. Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of Connect the Dots.